Joe Kerwin and I have known each other for 45 years now. I got here in March of 1966 with the new group of the original 19 astronauts. But Joe had been here about a year earlier because he was selected in that first group, in fact the only group of scientist astronauts that have ever been selected. These guys were pure scientists. They were selected for their scientific knowledge and skills and achievements, and had nothing to do with their flying ability. So even though we were new, our class was brand new, we shared with the old guys that were here, I think, the curiosity of this new species of astronaut that they had begun to select. And I really fully expected to see these guys walking around in white coats, you know, and bent over in the back of the corner with a lab or something. But when I learned that Joe was already a naval aviator who wore the Navy wings of gold, and oh, by the way, also happened to be a medical doctor, a flight surgeon, I was really, really impressed. I knew that this was a different breed of cat. And he stood out from the rest of his class also, by the way. And by the way, there's only a handful of these guys in the Navy who are flight surgeons who are selected to go to naval flight training and get their wings of gold. And they maintain a very, very small group of these guys. And all of them that are selected don't make it through flight school. So Joe was and is a pretty special breed of cat. But Joe's a lot more than a naval aviator and a flight surgeon. He's a brilliant scientist, a brilliant engineer, and a very operational savvy guy. He and two other guys, in fact, invented the SAFER, the very small miniaturized man maneuvering unit, more simple and more compact, that can fly a guy back to the station in case his tether becomes unhooked. And Joe and two other guys came up with that idea. Joe and I hit it off right off the bat and became very good friends. He's extremely friendly and a congenial guy. And this was a good thing, too, because we were selected to be part of the crew, along with Vance Brand, of the Apollo Command Module, the 2TV-1 vehicle that was put in thermal vacuum chamber A over here for an 7 or 8 day test. Chamber was pumped down to near vacuum, and the thermal lamps were turned on to try and simulate the environment, space environment. So we were inside that module, the command module, and got to know each other very, very intimately during that time too. When we came out of that, I must say that we came out of there better friends than when we went in. We really got to know each other well. And Joe's a great guy. If you're ever going to spend 8 days in a closet with somebody, you might look twice at Joe, because you can get along with him. I wanted to briefly share with you a memory, a photo of those days. The first photo was when, about a week after we had come out of that 8-day test, let's see, we were in Kenny Kleinknecht's office and received our plaques. And it does, I hate these pictures because it shows how much you age in 45 years. But Joe's the guy on the right of the picture there, the very clean-cut, clean-shaven guy. In fact, we were all pretty clean-shaven then. We had that, but actually when we first got out of the chamber, though, George Lowe, who you all remember the name, I'm sure, he was program manager, Apollo program manager at the time. He wanted us to come up to his office right away. He wanted to congratulate us and had a few things he wanted to give us. It was kind of a formal presentation, but I think he must have been leaving town, Joe, or something, because we had to get up there right away. We just had time to dress in our street clothes. And now you got to remember, this was the 60s. This was the era of the flower children and the hippies and all. And so we put on appropriate attire. If you could put up the next slide. And Vance and I, those are our beards, all right. The beads and the flowers, Joe had some extras hanging around, so he loaned us his beads and flowers to wear. Joe really is, he's a true gentleman. He's a true patriot. He's a real ambassador, and he's an example of the very best that JSC has ever produced. I'm very proud to know him, very proud to call him my friend. So would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Joe Kerwin.
Thank you, Joe. Here's your $10 for telling those lies. And I'll tell a few, too. Working with Joe Engle, being an astronaut in the 60s was a lot of fun. It was a very serious time and we had problems, but it was a heck of a lot of fun. And one of the funnest parts was finding out that I was going to be we were going to have our own Apollo spacecraft. Spacecraft 098, 2 TV1 was our own space. It was the first Block 2 spacecraft after the fire. Yeah, it was never going to fly, but we had a logo. We invited people to a pre-launch party. We played it up, and we had a great time in there, and as you see, a great time afterward because it was a successful flight. And it was always I always thought it was a privilege that I was part of the same crew with Joe Engle, a guy who was already an astronaut with golden wings when he came to the Johnson Space Center because he'd been part of the X-15 program and had flown 150 miles, a lot higher, I think, and got his wings that way. So much for that. That was good stuff. And let's see if I can. I want to go back one. Yeah, there's the. This is my introduction anymore. Research into what should have been, or tales of the old days. This, after I talked to Joe about the introduction, I just threw this slide in. This is the United States Marine Corps officer group from Attack Squadron. I didn't do that. Attack Squadron 225. I went to the Mediterranean with them on the USS Essex in 1959 and 1960. And these are the guys who impressed me so much as pilots, as patriots, as really neat guys that I decided that I wanted to be a naval aviator too and stick around in the Navy for a while. They did an amazing thing. There were 18 pilots in that group. One was killed in an aircraft accident. The other 17 all made their 100th carrier landing of the cruise on the very same day. That has never occurred before, and it has never occurred since in naval aviation. And just a bunch of great guys, and I wanted to show their picture one time before we start talking about space stations. And start by saying, what is a space station good for anyway? From the beginning, there have been a large number of different roles assigned as possibilities to stations. One of the common ones is as an intermediate stage on a journey. By the way, the slide you're looking at is the best view I could get of the space station from the movie 2001, which is not an intermediate stage on a journey. I'm thinking of something sort of like a base camp on the way up to Everest or a coal stop on an old train trip to California. Maybe we would assemble an interplanetary squadron around a space station with refueling capabilities and so on and so forth for an assault on Mars. I remember when I first showed up, we went to Marshall Space Flight Center for briefings, and Von Braun showed a Mars series of view graphs that I think they were lantern slides at the time that had 4 spacecraft in company going to Mars. An interesting way to think about the trip. Kind of pricey. Whether we really need a space station for those functions depends on the architecture that we have at the time. We may never need one. We can, of course, use one as an experimental lab. That's what the International Space Station is for. The work can either be development work, and life sciences always plays a big role, at least in my mind. Medical countermeasures, life support systems, so forth. Or it can be pure science, kind of like Skylab's solar physics experiments, which I'll talk about very briefly in a little bit. A satellite repair facility used to be a favorite thought. This has never happened. It might never be cost effective. You have different orbit inclinations to think about different altitudes. How do you get the space station to the satellite to the space station to be repaired? Does it use its own power and get refueled? Again, we've never had a busy enough system to allow that kind of thing to to be cost effective. As a tourist destination, this was usually an afterthought a long time ago, but it's not an afterthought anymore. There is now some serious thinking with the hopeful onset of actual commercial tourist space flights with Virgin Galactic and the test program for those spacecraft at scaled composites is going along well. We might see the first tourist launch in a year and a half or 2 years, and a space station as a tourist destination is a very real possibility. And I think in the long run, it's a great idea. Then we have some crazier ideas. This is an artist's image of a habitat in space that was designed by a physicist called Jerry O'Neill. I don't know if any of you remember the Jerry O'Neill era in the late 70s. He was talking about putting this huge facility in one of the lunar libration points between the Earth and the Moon. And the inside is hollowed out. It's about 1 mile in diameter. It has little lakes and waterfalls and farms and stuff like that. And made for some great view graphs. Yeah, my notes say herds of peaceful cattle. I like that. But there are a couple of reasons why this has always been a tough sell. Number one, the cost-benefit story is absolutely ridiculous. And number two, I think most of us who spent considerable time in weightlessness would agree that it's not a way of living we want permanently. Zero G is, quote, the most benign environment yet discovered, end quote. And you won't believe who that quote was by, John Young, when he was arguing against exercise experiments on the shuttle. But it's an uncomfortable environment. It's one you have to keep fighting against to stay fit. You need to exercise all the time and so on and so forth. We want to come home eventually and stand upon our country and smell the wind. So permanent habitats, I think, are a way off. My bottom line is there are a lot of good uses for a space station, but it's never where you want your trip to end. It's a way to get you there, and that's what the International Space Station is. And a space station, to be fully useful, has got to be part of a robust system of space transportation vehicles and other satellites. It has to be part of the system. A space station by itself would be like Disneyland in 1810. It'd be great if you could get to California, but you can't, you know. So that's kind of my introduction. And the next thought is, how did we get to where we are now in the world of real space stations? I was a junior in college when this photograph, or I think it's a painting by Chester Bonestell, appeared in Collier's magazine in 1952 in an article by Wernher von Braun and Willy Ley, laying out a human space program for America. It was quite a wake-up call. He became a little bit famous there, and Disney did some things, and some movies followed. But von Braun laid out a very logical plan, which started around 1960 or the early 60s with exploratory flights, learning how to do it. By 1980, we had a space station. And we had a space station for the purposes of learning how to live in space, developing space hardware and so on, and getting ready for the big one, which was a landing on the moon in the year 2000. What happened? Well, Sputnik happened, and the Bay of Pigs, and Khrushchev's table-hammering threats, and Kennedy needing to correct the impression that the U.S. and the world had that the Soviets had great technological leadership over us, and we decided to go to the moon after one 3-orbit mission. I recently was looking at some of my old management documents and came upon a statement by Chris Kraft, made quite a bit later on, that he said, some of us NASA folks didn't think it was a very good idea when Kennedy said he was going to the moon, that we were going to the moon. We didn't know how we were going to do that. And I thought, that's interesting. He never said that in public when I came on board in 1965, and thought, are we really going to the moon? Well, these guys seem to know what they're doing. I trust them. And of course, we got there. And meanwhile, though, von Braun didn't give up. Instead, he invented Skylab. and a prototype space station using the third stage of his Saturn V booster, the S-4B, as a spent stage workshop. He and the gentleman at NASA headquarters invented this, sketched it out at a meeting in Huntsville in about 1965, and that was the point in time at which NASA, still working on Project Gemini, learning how to rendezvous, learning how to do EVA and the other things we needed to do to go to the moon, began to realize that if we really landed on the moon in 1969, we were going to need a second act. NASA needed to decide what to do after the lunar landing program, and there was a host of good things we could do, and space station operations definitely played a role. So what we needed to start with was a prototype, an experiment in long-duration spaceflight. Is a space station feasible? I guess you could say in that sense we were test pilots, Joe, which I've never been other than that. The driving objectives were to demonstrate that humans could function properly in zero-G for up to 3 months, to collect the life support, human factors data, design requirements for a permanent station, and to demonstrate that significant science could be done by people floating around in space. We did accomplish those objectives, and I will talk about them just a little bit because Space Station or Skylab was my flight, and I have to say something about it. You've got to give me that indulgence. We were to launch on the station on a Saturn V on May 14th, 1973, and off it went right on time. Beautiful launch, beautiful clear day, and we, the crew, were to launch the following day on Saturn I to rendezvous and dock with Skylab. We went back to the Manned Space Operations Building to the crew quarters where we had our comms set up and immediately discovered that there was trouble. The Skylab had reached orbit, but temperatures were rising. There was no response from one of the two main solar panels. The other one, just a tiny trickle of current. And in a word, we had lost our heat shield from around the S-4B. It had taken off one half of our main power capability and locked the other half down, and we were in deep trouble. We went through a really inspiring 10-day period where the engineers saved Skylab by devising 3 different ways to cool the spacecraft by putting an external parasol, and we had 3 of them when we launched, we'd never seen before, and then beginning to work on tools that we might need to pry up the solar panel. That was before they had any pictures. We went up, this was a picture we took during our fly around. We launched 10 days late. And this picture shows on the lower right the remaining solar panel cover open about 18 inches with a little bit of sunshine coming in on those folded up panels. The short story is that the day following launch, we got the first parasol up, and the temperatures in the workshop came down from over 130 to the high 80s, which was a nice dry heat, and we were able to work nicely in that and go up toward the command module and docking adapter to cool off and have it tang. But the first 2 weeks in the station were austere because we had so little power. The solar telescope, I need to go back to that and point out that the orbital workshop is on your left, and you see it with one solar panel. The other is on the side you can't see. And coming up in the middle of that cluster between the workshop and the command module is what they call the Apollo telescope mount. It was a group of 7 high-power telescopes and cameras, all to be pointed accurately at the sun, to explore the sun in various wavelengths. We could track targets. We could take film and video pictures. It was a terrific tool, and it had its own solar panels that accounted for about 1/3 of the power available to Skylab. Fortunately, they were all ganged together. So we were living off that power. We had to turn lights out whenever we left an area. We weren't allowed to heat the coffee. The shower was out of the question. We had a shower up there. And it was clear that, we tried an Earth resources pass once in which you take the whole spacecraft out of the pointing to the sun attitude, and you do it in a local vertical attitude so you can track targets and take high quality photographs. And when we moved the solar panels, the ones that were up out of direct sunlight, the batteries began to discharge and the lights went off and bells clanged, and they said, "Quick, get back to solar inertial." And we never did that again until we had the power. So we went out on about the 14th day, and this is a picture Weitz took of me through one of the windows. We didn't take any cameras outside. We went out with tools, a telephone company cable cutter, and 5 5-foot sections of aluminum pipe that we screwed together, and some ropes, and pried up that solar panel. There is no photograph of it, but somebody, an artist afterward, did this rather accurate compendium. We went around to a place where there was a stub of an antenna that you could kind of wrap one hand around. We learned how to point the limb lopper out and capture the scrap of aluminum that was holding down the solar panel, cut it halfway through. Then Pete used that as a handhold to go out and put another rope and hook it onto the back of the solar panel cover, and I tightened it up and fastened it to a spar, and then the two of us got under that rope and stood up. And when we put 200 pounds of tension on the frozen joint, man, it popped open, and we went head over heels into outer space, connected by our sturdy umbilicals, and by the time we got back down to something and turned around, that thing was fully erect, and the solar panels were starting to come out, and that really felt good, because we knew Houston would love us for the rest of the mission, no matter what we did wrong. We knew that the crews of the second and third flights were down there cheering, because now they had flights again, which they wouldn't have had, and it was just a really nice day. So then we went about the business of qualifying human beings, and there was considerable nervousness in the medical guys about 4 weeks in space, just because not only had we seen some changes in our 2-week flight earlier, but the Russians had launched a space station flight, a primitive space station flight, about 7 months before Skylab. Stayed up, a crew of 3, for 23 days, deorbited and landed in their usual spot, and the crew were all dead. And that was a moment of thoughtful silence. We found out by a back channel that they had a loss of pressure in the spacecraft and had died of hypoxia, not of duration-related problems. But then the scientists in the United States launched a monkey on a biosatellite mission, which launched within a few days of the launch of Apollo 11 in 1969 for a 30-day mission with a monkey to prove out the safety of space before Skylab. Well, this monkey lasted 8 days. He became moribund in the spacecraft. They brought it down, got him to Hawaii, and he died several hours after recovery. And these guys, these scientists, formed an angry group and went to Washington and demanded of the Congress that they stop the Skylab program because this magnificently performed experiment had resulted in the death of the monkey. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. Even the congressmen were smart enough to say, well, we've flown, I forget how many, 30-some human beings by that time, and for 8 days, some of them, and they all seemed fine. What's the problem? So we pressed on to Skylab, but the doctors were nervous. And when we found out that we couldn't properly ride the bicycle the first few times we tried it, they got much more nervous. We were up there with a complicated harness, shoulder straps and a big waist belt and bungee cords that held us down onto the bicycle seat and fastened to the floor. Try riding a bike that way and getting your heart rate up. The straps cut into your thighs and cut off the circulation to your legs, and your muscles hurt. You have to quit early. And Pete Conrad, who had reasons for wanting to show a very good result on Skylab. Was throwing a few premature ventricular contractions. His EKG was, nothing major. We've seen it before, but the doctors were saying this is not good. Long duration space flight is at risk. And on day 11, the twain met. We found out how to ride the bike, which was by throwing away the harness and letting our head just ride up on the surface, which is what P.J. Weitz is doing here. And the doctors decided finally that they could not let this go on, and we were not allowed to ride the bike unless we were fully instrumented and over a stateside pass so they could watch every heartbeat. Not that that would help, but that's what they wanted to do. So Pete, being a shy kind of a guy, demanded an immediate private conference with Chris Kraft, and they sorted it out. And the next day he took an ergometer test, instrumented as Paul is here. Passed it with flying colors and was allowed to go on the spacewalk to pry up the solar panel, and Skylab succeeded. And this is me examining Pete, just doing my clinical thing up there. The reason Pete wanted to be really successful is that he was part of the original 7 qualification testing. He was one of the group from which the original 7 were selected. They had physical exams in various places, but the main one was in Albuquerque, New Mexico at Kirtland. And he was given a rough examination by one of the surgeons. And in the bar that evening at the officers club, he went up to this guy and sort of complained. So he was not selected, and his medical statement said, "Not psychologically adapted for long-duration spaceflight." Pete told us that story 3 or 4 times during the mission. I'll show him who's psychologically adapted. And it was Pete's idea that on landing, once we were on the water and we're hoisted up onto the deck of the carrier, when they opened the hatch, we were not going to let the flight surgeon get in there and take our pulse. We were going to be out the door before they could do anything about it, which is what we did. And so Pete was invested in this, and he exercised more than any of us. And we did our thing. We did the solar science, and none of us were solar scientists. We did a lot of training to learn how to run the experiments. But near to launch time, there was this great meeting of principal investigators to determine how much leeway crew members on orbit should be given to respond to a solar flare. And Dr. Milligan, the principal investigator of one of the experiments, couldn't make it, and he wrote this. You may have read it already. SO56 is a crew experiment. We consider the pads from the ground as advisory. The crewman always has the option to operate the experiment in any manner he wishes. We on SO56 feel that the crew will or are better trained and have more information available to make decisions than we ever could. If SO56 does not get the proper data, the cause will be poor instrument design. Now, if you ever want to motivate somebody to do a great job for you, just write something like that. We felt terrific about Milligan and about the whole program. We said, we're gonna kill ourselves to do good work for that guy and all the rest of them too. That was a fine letter. So this is just one of the many views. We get these views in real time. We'd be able to track active regions and see developing flares. And on day 23, I think it was, Paul Weitz was at the console during our first actual big-time flare, and we got most of the rise time, and everybody was happy with us after that. We did some playing. This is the 3 of us running around the ring lockers on the inside of the big workshop. That's 20 feet in diameter and 30 feet long, much bigger than any of the modules on the International Space Station, and quite open. It was a pleasanter place to fool around in than any human in space has had before or since. Maybe we'll get back to it someday. So we had made a bet on the ground whether you could or could not actually run around the ring lockers, develop enough centrifugal force for your feet to stick. And we did it. We did this to the strains of the the Strauss 2001 music, and we did it to raise Houston's morale. This was before we got the power back, and had a great time. We also had a great time looking out the window, seeing sights like this. This is something, a photograph that I took probably 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, Houston time, which we were on. So we stayed up after bedtime to look out the window to see the Eastern Hemisphere lit. And I'm looking from essentially a little bit east of the Crimea over central Turkey, looking down southwest toward the Eastern Mediterranean. Out in the blue there is the island of Cyprus. And then you can go down the coast and you can pick out Lebanon and Israel and the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba, leading off into the Red Sea and then vanishing over the horizon, the Nile River. Oh boy. And that big river is the Euphrates. It's the cradle of civilization. So much has happened there over so many thousand years, and we're just getting a look at it. That's why hotels in space and space tourism are going to be successful, because no matter how many times you've done it, or it's been done, it's like love. The first time you fall in love, it's very special. This is Skylab as flown. Actually, this is after the third flight, and I can tell because the solar parasol that they're using is the second one that the second crew put up, which is bigger than ours and got temperature down a little further, with one solar panel and a really good spacecraft. We called it the von Braun Hilton, and it was pretty special. So our prototype space station was successful. The space station, the shuttle program by that time had been approved and was in the early phases of design. And obviously we felt that we'd set the stage for a permanent space station, but we certainly weren't going to get one until the shuttle had not only finished being designed, but had flown and proven to be an effective transportation system. So in 1975, NASA had a year-long study called the Outlook for Space, and Joe Allen and I were privileged to be on the 20-man team for that, 20-person team for that study, to outline NASA's priorities from 1980 to 2000. The leader was a guy named Don Harth, who was director at Langley, and when we were all done, we went around the country briefing the various centers and folks on this, and Don would always start out by saying, I'm going to tell you a story. There was a NASA engineer type who was convicted of a major crime and sentenced to death. And the executioner said, Mr. Jones, before we carry out the sentence, do you have any last words? And he said, yes, I do. First slide, please. And he'd go into his pitch. And at our first meeting, Mr. Harth conducted straw votes on several interesting questions, one of which was, should the U.S. develop a space station? And the vote was 18-2 against. But Joe Allen and I went to work, and at the end of the year, the final vote was 17-1 in favor with 2 abstentions. 2 of the science types just still couldn't take it. But it was not the International Space Station. A guy named Bob Pyland, whom one or two of you may remember, a very fine director of engineering here, summed it up like this. He said, space processing, physical and chemical research, and various aspects of the life science discipline provide a justification for the pursuit of a modest but permanent space station. The need for larger and more expensive space station activities may derive from the results of these activities. Very sensible. Start small and grow. So we wrote our conclusion, and I stated it in verse as follows. The study group respectfully would thus advise the nation, we've built a railroad into space, and now we need a station. And again, you've got to have the system in place or the station doesn't make any sense. So along we went, and in 1980, we still weren't flying, so they still had to do something with astronauts, so I got sent to a NASA-sponsored summer study at Woods Hole of the human role in space, which included a critical review of a space station study prototype called the Space Operations Center, sock. This was a bunch of scientists down there, plus James Michener, who's a really neat author. And I thought they would hate the Space Operations Center, but they didn't. They loved it instead because it was operational. It didn't monopolize science. It supported it. It started small, grew slowly, had 4 modules, didn't threaten big unmanned space projects like Hubble Space Telescope and the other things that they wanted to see done. I've always thought in hindsight we passed through the right design in 1980 and never quite got back. Of course, it was 1984 before President Reagan gave his permanent presence speech, and the Space Station Freedom was submitted to Congress. This was the reference configuration out of Phase B. Again, it was fairly modest. It had more power and more external truss than the Space Operations Center. It was gravity gradient stable, which meant it was a very efficient. It required low fuel consumption for attitude maintenance. It was pretty neat in many respects, but the same tiny gravitational force differences as you go from the bottom to the top of the station, when the bottom's pointing at the Earth, as you get farther away, the force of gravity gets a little bit smaller, and that meant that instead of 10 to the minus 6th or minus 7th torr gravity forces in the modules, it was maybe 10 to the minus 5th. And the material sciences would have none of that. They wanted 10 to the minus 6 or better, which meant putting the modules at the center of the space station, which meant that gravity gradient stabilization was no longer feasible. And we went through a lot of iterations like that, and they kept getting bigger for a while. Lord, look at that one. What happened was as follows. When Reagan sent the station to Congress, Congress was not happy. They wanted to be assured of political support for the $8 billion investment, which was Reagan's ceiling, and that was a lot of money at the time. They refused to fund it fully until proof was given that there'd be lots of science to do on freedom. So NASA went forth and begged for experiments from all the scientific disciplines, and they got them. Even the opponents of the station didn't want to be left out just in case. And soon we had the famous Langley database with literally thousands of experiments grouped by different disciplines. And there again were just a couple of problems. One, there wasn't enough money in Fort Knox to fund all those experiments. No way. And two, doing them would call for a very large and complicated facility, far in excess of the budget and straining our resupply capability as far as we could forecast it then in the mid-'80s. So we went to a somewhat more modest scrub, and this was the baseline for the Phase CD proposals in 1986 for a 1987 go-ahead. And never during that period of time, from 1984 through the beginning of Phase CD, did NASA come anywhere close to its $8 billion budget. We were always over budget, even going in, even with our optimistic estimates. It was not good. Gordon Fullerton wrote a blunt memo in late 1986 stating all these things and objecting to the excessive maintenance and the excessive reliance on EVA to perform the maintenance. And here's what he said. The user requirements have dominated the design. The user requirement list is a wish list. NASA didn't want to hear that. Current program policy is to stick with the scrub configuration as a Phase B result. Pardon the misspelling. Allow redesign to workable configuration in Phase CD. We were going to let the contracts and then redo the station after Phase CD had started. Poor maintenance access, shuttle requirements unreasonable, excessive EVA. People don't believe in this station. Belief that NASA is misrepresenting what we can do. And here's what he said we should do. National Heavy Lift Booster. Have you ever heard that one before? Oh, man, it's been the right answer pretty often, and this is one of the times when it would have been the right answer. Core station, 1 or 2 heavy lift launches. Attach the international modules externally and add truss structure per actual needs, not projected needs. Naturally, he was ignored. He showed this view graph of the Soviet Mir space station as it was in 1986 as an example of starting small and working your way up, which I thought was pretty interesting. So we went on into phase CD and worked the station and worked budget problems, which we had built in for ourselves. And if we had solved those problems by 1992, there might never have been an international space station with the massive Russian participation that we got. And it was working out those problems with good center management, but it was too late. A new administration came in 1993, and Reagan Station was doomed. First it was canceled, then they said, well, we'll do a massive redesign study. So they did a massive redesign study. I was with Lockheed at the time and was on their team working on one of the options. They had 3 options. You are looking at option C, and if you were Gordon Fullerton, you had to shake your head with unbelief and say, why didn't they do that in 1986? That's the core module delivered by a shuttle-based heavy lift launch vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's my station. Unfortunately, option C was not selected. As a matter of fact, neither option A, B, or C was selected. Another group had been working with the Russians in secret off on the side, and that one was selected in September. And off we went on the International Space Station. Now, having said how we stumbled into what we've got, I want to say very clearly that I have enormous admiration for the management team that pushed through their problems and brought us the great station we have today. Mr. Gerstenmaier stands with George Lowe and Bob Thompson and Aaron Cohen and the other great NASA program managers in our history. But we lack a transportation system. We lack the system, the infrastructure to make a station optimally useful. It's a station without a train. It's outlived the shuttle. Constellation, I think, has been canceled. I have to read the daily paper to find out what the latest status is. Where are we going from here? I was supposed to show ISS while I talked about that. But I went to the next one. And you'll say, what? What is Kerwin trying to tell us now? Thinking about our past adventures, you notice that things don't always turn out the way you plan them. Vanguard was an example. This was our first attempt at launching something into orbit after Sputnik, the Navy Vanguard booster, which ended in disaster with the little grapefruit-sized payload lying there on the sand going beep, beep, beep. That was when von Braun stepped up and said, I can launch in 90 days, and did. But von Braun, his original sequence of spaceflight was totally changed. Apollo 13 is an example of unplanned disaster occurring and being overcome. Skylab, we dealt with that near-fatal launch damage. And the Constellation program is just the latest example of a well-planned program, but one of too long duration to survive enough government transitions and to get to where it will be successful. We can still do some good here. We life sciences types want to use the International Space Station to finish getting ready for deep space, perfecting countermeasures, improving medical care, understanding radiation, and some more things. We can do that, and we will. And then we'll see where NASA is ready to go from there. The future hasn't happened yet, and we Americans have the will and ingenuity to create one that we like, and I think we will. And for all those of you out there who are 30 or 40 years younger than me, these are the good old days about which you will look back pleasantly when you're as old as I am. And I'm ready to take questions, comments, tomatoes, whatever you got. I think the routine is that you've got some guys with microphones. Yeah. And so if anybody has something they want to say, just raise your hand.
Yes, Dr. Kerwin, could you talk a bit more about your spacewalk where you guys were doing that solar panel repair and you said it sprung out and hit you guys? Was that dramatic? Was that like a baseball, like a bat hitting a ball, or was that just the thing kind of sprung out and pushed you out of the way? Was it a close call, or could you talk a bit more about that?
About our spacewalk?
Yes, sir. As well as what it was like working in those suits. Was it easy to do the tasks you had to do to fix the station, or did you have to improvise a lot?
We all had fairly extensive training in the suit at the water immersion facility down in Huntsville. So we were pretty comfortable with our suits. They were well fitted. They were basically Apollo A7L suits, but reconfigured so that we didn't have or need a backpack. We lived off an umbilical instead, which gave us maybe a little increase in mobility, certainly a decrease in mass and volume. So although we were not trained to do external repair, nor was Skylab configured to do external repair, the only reason we had the suits was the Apollo telescope mount. Those solar physics cameras required old film to be collected and new film to be reinstalled about every 28 days. Thank the Lord we had done that, and we're ready. So when we went up there, we took a bunch of pictures and sent the video back to Houston. And here on the ground, the engineers and the backup crew devised a possible way of prying up the solar panel and went and tried it again in the water immersion facility in Huntsville. And finally, on about day 10 or 11, Rusty Schweikert got on the horn and gave us a detailed blow-by-blow account of what he thought would work, told us what equipment was available as handholds, just one antenna, as a matter of fact. I said, how much force can we put on that antenna? He said, well, about 40 pounds. And it's pretty hard in a pressurized suit to calibrate 40 pounds of force. But we said, okay. And what we did, Pete and I got in the airlock and opened it, and then I got out first, and Pete handed me one 5-foot section of pipe after another, and I screwed them together until we had the 25 feet assembled with the 2 ropes running from one end down to the other. So it was all ready to go. And then I carried that pole. Actually, I went out by myself, and Pete then came out and handed me the pole, and we went halfway around the side of the Skylab to the place closest to the stuck solar panel. We were still, we were a good 25 feet away from where we had to be, and there were no handholds, no footholds, no lighting, but we didn't really have suit problems, except that once we got into place and the sun rose and we were ready to go, the job was at the other end of the 25-foot pole were the jaws of this cable cutter about that big, and Pete was to hold my legs, and I was to drop the jaws onto that scrap of aluminum that was holding the solar panel down. And I couldn't do it. I would start to move, and my body would move the other direction. Newton's third law was just frustrating. And I guess we were putting out a stream of naughty words. And we lost the signal with NASA and had just gotten nowhere. And we stopped to sort of assess the situation and take a breath. And I noticed a bolt, a sort of a U-bolt that emerged from the surface of the Skylab about a foot away from the base of that antenna. And I had a spare tether on my chest. We had all kinds of stuff. I had a dental saw, all this stuff gray taped to us in case we needed it. And the light bulb came on, and we fastened one end of that tether to my chest, down and through that U-bolt and back to my chest, and tightened it up, and I had a 3-point suspension, 2 feet plus the tether, and I was as stable as a rock. And about 1 minute after that, we got the jaws on the scrap. We bit through until the scrap was about half cut, and then Pete did his thing, and the rest as I described it. And when that was over, the hardest part of the whole EVA was stuffing the 60 feet of umbilicals, the 120 feet of umbilicals, 60 for each of us, back into the airlock and putting it back in those little spheres. Before we did that, we went out to the sun end of the Apollo telescope mount just to check out the handholds and footholds and do a couple little chores that NASA had for us. And the sight from up there was so magnificent. It was the middle of the day, so the sun was directly overhead. The Earth was down here, and you were king of the hill up there, man. Standing up in the foot restraints with the whole world down below you. We felt like we owned the place. I don't know if I answered your question. I just got off on it. Yeah.
Dr. Kerwin, I really appreciate the way you've put this presentation together, kind of the long arc of history, post-Apollo and Skylab, during that time and where we are today. I wanted to ask, from your perspective, what were kind of the fundamental research questions at the time that we started Skylab, both in the life sciences and the engineering disciplines? And then fast forward to today, where did we learn to ask better questions based on our experiences in Skylab and International Space Station, and which pesky old questions just kind of still remain?
Basically, you're asking how do we ask better research questions?
Yeah, or what questions did we already solve?
Okay,
and which
okay,
ones do we still have to solve?
I have a whole nother talk which is on life sciences in space, and the gist of that is that in the first several years through the end of the Apollo program, both the doctors and the research scientists were very frustrated because they weren't getting any real data from weightlessness. They were getting pre- and post-flight data. They were, you lost weight, you may have passed out in a shower after an Apollo mission, your red cell count is down. A couple of the crew members on Apollo 15 had heart irregularities. Data that's hard to interpret. What's really going on? So Skylab was the first chance to actually do in-flight experiments, to actually collect data in flight. We did a total intake and output study on Skylab, which meant that everything we ate, everything we drank, and any liquid or solid stuff that came out of us, they gave up on sweat, was measured, and samples of it, or the whole thing, were returned to Earth. That's a hospital study, and it's hard to do even in a hospital, and we did it in a spacecraft. I don't think anybody will ever want to do it again, but we did it well. And somehow, from nowhere, this group of experiments came together on Skylab that astonished me because they were as complete as they could be. They hit the major points, and we got a lot of answers that we needed to get about the basic processes going on. And without going into any more detail, other than to say that the one countermeasure that over 3 flights showed itself to be essential and effective was exercise. We didn't know exactly what the exercise prescription needed to be. We didn't know what happened past 90 days. So a great deal of experience and data has accumulated both on Mir and on International Space Station, and we've gotten a lot closer. I think there are still some final things. There's some changes. We thought, Bill Thornton and I thought certainly, that the pounding, the repetitive pounding of a treadmill would be what kept the bones of the lower extremities from losing minerals too fast. Turns out that resistive exercise is better. Now, have we got the right prescription yet? I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not up on the latest results on the new red. But that kind of stuff needs to be done. And then to my mind, the focus needs to change a little bit to medical care, because we're in a situation where, with one exception, that being radiation, I think we're ready to go to Mars. We can tweak the exercise, and we know things about the diet. But the minute you burn out of Earth orbit, you are your own country, and you ain't coming home for at least a year and probably 2. And And if something goes wrong with the system, you got to fix it. If something goes wrong with the people, you got to do your best to fix that too. And we need to embellish and finalize the lessons on what sort of medical capability and what sort of training and what kind of trained people you want to take on that flight. That's my personal tunnel view of what questions need to be answered. We've answered a lot of questions about the fundamentals and about the transition into weightlessness, dreaded space motion sickness and stuff like that. The radiation question, which is largely a matter of measuring the actual damage that it's going to do, and the medical care questions are, to my mind, the biggies that would keep us from going comfortably to Mars. But if we could go to Mars tomorrow, I think we would get a lot of volunteers. Sorry for the long answer again. This is shop talk. You know how that goes.
Yeah. Hi.
Howdy.
Got a question for you. If you considered both the resource implications and the medical implications, at what pressure would you put a spacecraft going to Mars or an asteroid for a long duration?
I didn't get the gist of the question.
At what pressure would you operate the spacecraft at? So as you're transitioning, say, to Mars or to an asteroid, what pressure would you operate? Would you be
atmospheric pressures. That's another thing we had a lot of fun with. Yeah. I've always been a low pressure kind of a guy, and just because if you want to eliminate both pre-breathing and bends and go outside on a spacewalk whenever you want to, sea level is not where you want to start. And of the studies that have been done, obviously in Apollo we were at 5 psi, which is about as low as you want to go physiologically. The Skylab 5 psi, 70% oxygen, 30% nitrogen was a very nice atmosphere. It was physiologically we had a sea level equivalent oxygen in our tissues, and it was bends proof. So it was good, but 5 psi is considered too low for cooling if you're using air cooling. The oxygen concentration is too high for comfort from a flammability point of view. Requires a lot of discipline on what you fly. And it seems to me that the later studies have arrived at to do higher than 5, somewhere around 7.5 or 8. Close to 50-50, or maybe even a little more nitrogen than that. But definitely below sea level pressure, because the gains you make in mobility and the losing the need to pre-breathe overnight or so before you go outside show that that's an advantage. And medically, I remember before Space Station was designed at a 14.7 psi, we had a terrific battle over this, and scientist after scientist got up and declared that if we didn't go sea level pressure, our baseline data would be useless, and we would have to devise an expensive facility and put it here at JSC where we could do 3-month to 6-month studies of human beings under that reduced pressure so as to get a valid baseline. But nobody has ever published any criticism of the Skylab data based on the pressure. So I don't think that's a real problem.
With the duration of the Skylab missions, what were the readaptation measures that you guys took once you got back on the ground after, what is it, a month in space, compared to the space station crews usually being up there for 6 months?
Say it again slowly. My hearing aids are not getting all the consonants.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The readaptation measures that you guys did in the early 70s for the 1 month periods in space compared to the 6 months that they spend on the ISS today.
Okay. You probably all heard the question better than I do, and I finally got it. It was about the rehabilitation after extended duration weightlessness. We didn't have a rehab program after Skylab. We had a take it easy for a while. We're not going to let you get back in the T-38 for a week, and be gentle about resuming your exercise program and just go at your own pace. And one or two guys, Ed Gibson comes to mind, tried to go out and do too much too soon and develop back problems that set him back another couple of months. But basically, the rehab was shown to be desirable, if not necessary, during the Mir ISS program, and I think that you all have a much better handle on it now than we do. I would be interested in seeing an experiment take place devised to show how much a deconditioned crew member after 6 months in space can do on a simulated Mars surface. What kind of spacecraft control and other tasks can be planned for that first 24, 48, 72-hour period on the surface before you go outside. Okay. Thank you all for coming. And